our attachment behaviors are activated in times of threat or distress,
Yeah.
right? Attachment is really about feeling safe and secure during times of threat or distress.
Mhm.
And so, um, the irony there, though, by the way, is if you have an insecure attachment, you're like much more likely to not feel safe or to experience like threat.
Hey guys, welcome back to Let's Talk About It. Today we're interviewing Dr. Matthew Breuninger. He is an assistant professor of psychology at Franciscan University of Steubenville. He earned an MA in theology from Ave Maria University and a doctoral degree in clinical psychology from Baylor University.
Dr. Breuninger is a licensed clinical psychologist. His clinical interests include anxiety, depression, trauma, and substance abuse. His academic interests comprise the intersection of faith and psychology, psychology of religion, and virtue formation. Today we are going to be talking to him about attachment styles, so we hope you enjoy.
Well, thanks for having me, y'all.
Oh, well, thank you so much for
Oh,
coming
yeah.
on.
I appreciate it.
Yes.
So I went to Franciscan.
Okay.
I graduated in 2018, but I don't think I ever introduced myself or anything, but you spoke to our women's group when I was in the women's group
Okay.
about mental health, I think.
Yeah.
Because we did an event about mental health that year that
That's right.
my friend Gina and I spoke at for women on campus. Then also, I think before that though, you gave a talk on healing. And it was the first time had ever heard about healing spoken about in that way. And
Yeah.
what I really remember that you said, I remember some other things that you said, but I remembered you showed like a diagram and it was like of a wound and the way that God heals, that he often
Yeah.
peels back like an onion.
Yep.
And I don't know, that just really stuck with me. And then as I got older and moved to Chicago, and just like further worked through healing, I started reading like Dr. Bob Schuchts and
Sure.
Unbound by Neil Lozano. But
Sure.
it's very similar
Yes. Yes.
ways of talking about healing. But I just
Yeah.
remembered that, and that really had an
Yeah.
impact on me. So thank you for that.
Yeah. You're welcome. That talk was actually it's funny. I was asked to give that talk as part of the symposium on human sexuality,
Okay.
and it was like one of the first sort of big talks I gave on campus, and
Yeah.
it was just so well received that it ended up being the impetus to write the book. I mean, it was just
Yeah.
it made me realize how much people were hurting and
Yeah.
how people wanted an approach that integrated the faith, and so it really got me. It launched me on a path to sort of thinking about this stuff a little more seriously. So I'm incredibly grateful for that talk in particular.
Yeah. Yeah.
Clearly it had an impact.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I remember that. So,
Mhm.
and that was some years ago at this point.
Yeah.
So,
Sure.
well, before we get more into the interview and talking
Mhm.
about your work and attachment styles,
Yeah.
in your book,
Yeah.
can you share a little bit about yourself with our listeners?
Sure. Yeah. My name is Dr. Matt Breuninger. I'm an associate professor of psychology at Franciscan University in Steubenville, and I'm also a clinical psychologist. So I have a group practice that I founded, and I'm the clinical director of, called Wellspring Counseling, Coaching, and Consulting. And um, yeah, I did my master's degree in theology at Ave Maria University. I did my doctoral work at Baylor in clinical psychology, and I have just a real interest in trying to bring together faith and psychology in ways that hopefully preserve both, um, and trying to help people grow through some of these difficulties and challenges in life. I have a beautiful wife, Brittany, and we have 6 kids, and
Oh,
so that's a little bit about me.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Well, we're so excited to have you come on and talk about attachment styles. This is something,
yeah,
one thing I love is that you are so focused on the intersection of faith and psychology,
yeah,
because Jackie and I are both really passionate and deep in our faith, but also like really care about mental health. And
for
we have
sure.
talked before on this podcast about our own mental health struggles. So
Mm,
I love that intersection, that you having your book and everything
Yeah.
like that. So yeah,
Yeah.
we're excited to talk about attachment styles today because I
Likewise.
know it's something we've talked about before, how much it affects people and
Yeah.
they might not even realize,
Yeah.
because not a lot of people even know what attachment styles are.
Agreed. Yeah, agreed. I think it's um you have to be careful in psychology to not get too everyone sort of got their pet thing that they love, and I want to be careful never to make more of it than is there.
Mm.
But it seems in so many ways to me really important and really foundational, um,
Mm.
in a way that sort of can directly and indirectly affect so many areas of our life, including how we view God. And so
Yes.
I think it's a topic that I think is really worth understanding, because there's also, I think, some misinformation out there about it too. So I think it's helpful to understand.
Yeah.
Yes.
Would you be
Yeah.
able to define maybe really quick for someone who has like no
Yeah.
familiarity with what an attachment style is? Like, how would you, in a nutshell,
Yeah.
break that down for someone?
Yeah. So your attachment, the attachment itself is the emotional bond. They call it the socio-emotional bond between a child and a caregiver. Meaning, it's like it's the feeling that occurs in relationship between a child and a caregiver.
Mm.
And in particular, attachment is about felt security. It's about feeling safe and secure and trusting that your caregiver will be there to provide safety, not only physically, but also emotionally.
Mm.
And so it's about felt safety and security in relationships with caregivers. And generally speaking, um, you form attachment. So one thing is, it became popular a while back to say, well, I do attachment parenting. And in some ways, that's sort of like a silly thing to say because everyone does attachment parenting. Whether you, whether you're trying to or not, you are parenting, because you'll either have secure attachment or some very insecure attachment. So I think what people mean when they say I do attachment parenting is they mean something like I try to pay attention to the particular things that I know help form a secure attachment. But I'll tell you what those things are. So generally speaking, you form a secure, safe attachment through attuned, empathic, consistent care. So attuned means I see what you need, right? I accurately see what's happening. So is the child afraid? Is the child hungry? When the child cries, what are they telling me, right? It's trying to listen to the voice of the child, even if the child doesn't have a voice yet. What are they saying? And accurately perceiving that. That's attunement. But that's not enough. You not only do you have to see what the child needs, you have to convey with a sort of warmth or empathy that you're there and present. And so this is, eye contact, gentle touch, um, tone of my voice, right? I'm here. It's okay. I'm safe. You're safe. And then consistency. You can see what a child needs and respond with warmth, but if you're only there 50% of the time, the child will feel anxious. When I cry, does mom or dad come? When I'm hurt, does mom or dad help me? That inconsistency can actually create tremendous anxiety. And so to form a secure attachment, you need attuned, empathic, and consistent care. And this kind of goes into one of the common misconceptions is sometimes I'll hear moms and dads say, well, we do attachment parenting, so we baby wear and co-sleep. And like, if you want to baby wear and co-sleep, like have at it. Yeah. Like we co-sleep, not because we attachment parent. We co-sleep because like we're phlegmatic, and the thought of having to get up and like put the baby back in his bed is like, it's exhausting. So, the point there is actually that some children, like a really good parent knows when their child actually doesn't want to be touched, when their child uh, needs time to freely explore the environment, or is in a place where they don't want to be physically touched. But right, so touch is important, but sort of just assuming that baby wearing is enough or co-sleeping is enough, that I think that fails to recognize the quality of the bond. There has to be warmth, there has to be attunement and consistency. So I've seen people baby wear and just be sort of frantic and frenetic,
Sure.
or cold and distant, even though they're wearing their baby. There has to be a communication of warmth, safety. When the child has to learn that when I cry, like my voice is heard and my caregivers want to hear my voice, and it's safe to have needs. That's what attachment's about. And if we have that, right, I'm like talking so much. You guys are so patient. If we have that, it gives us the freedom to take risks, to explore our environment, to try to step into our gifts and talents, right, over time. If we don't have that, we can feel anxious or worried that to explore or to take risks or to fail might mean we lose love or we lose security, or the people around us can't handle us taking risks or failing, and so as a result we sort of develop oftentimes in a way that's influenced by our attachment.
Well, I
We
thought I
don't
knew.
remember being a
Yeah.
baby.
Don't
So
remember
it can
being a
be hard
baby.
Don't
to
remember. but-
Yeah. And that's why it feels like us. I mean, it just feels like
Yeah.
me. It's just
Yeah.
it I mean, in a lot of ways, that's a great point. Attachment, it gets neurobiologically like imprinted. I mean, it does. Children that come from really hard places that tend to have insecure attachments have a whole host of like neurobiological differences. Now here's the good news. The good news is that that's not fixed. It's not so deeply imprinted that it's unchangeable. Our attachment styles can be changed. It's, does it take work? Yeah. Does it take time? Yeah. They don't form overnight and they don't change overnight, but they're not fixed. And so if you have an insecure attachment, we can do work to help foster a sense of safety and security in relationships.
Yeah, I've done a lot of study of attachment styles, but I feel like I learned so much from what you just said, the way that you put it. So that was great. Yeah, I found in my own life that I agree with you, as you said, that I think your attachment style is really, really important because, like we said, you can't remember exactly how you were treated as a baby, but then you carry that with you all the way into your adult life and your relationships with your friends and romantic relationships. And like you said, you may have different struggles with different mental illness, or I forget what word you use, but different like issues because of your attachment style, and you might not even really understand like where that's coming from. So Megan and I, we're pretty aware of the different attachment styles. I know they're secure, which is the goal.
Definitely. Yep.
And then I've had it explained that there's 3 others. There might be more, but I know that there's avoidant, anxious, and disorganized.
Disorganized. Yeah.
Yes.
So
if you
generally
could explain
speaking, right?
those, yeah.
Like not disorganized, sorry, anxious attachment is about, or is oftentimes characterized by people who sometimes it's called anxious ambivalent. So there's all these, the literature on this is sort of different people are writing, and adult attachment stuff is influenced by the child attachment stuff. So sometimes the language gets, it used to be called anxious preoccupied. Sometimes it's called anxious ambivalent, okay. But generally speaking, when we talk about an anxious attachment, we're talking about somebody who, I should mention this, it's important. Our attachment behaviors are activated in times of threat or distress. Right? Attachment is really about feeling safe and secure during times of threat or distress. And so, the irony there, though, by the way, is if you have an insecure attachment, you're like much more likely to not feel safe or to experience like threat. And so, but basically the anxious attachment style is something like during times of threat or distress, you want to draw near to your caregiver. So you orient toward them, you seek proximity to them. When you see this in children, it's really clear. The child runs to their parent crying, they hop in their parent's arms, but they don't experience their caregiver as a safe, calming presence. And so while they want to be near the caregiver, when they're in the caregiver's presence, they continue to feel distressed.
Mm.
And so sometimes this happens when parents tend toward responding inconsistently.
Mm.
So I want to be near you. I get near you, but I don't know if you're going to stay. I don't know how long you're going to stay. I don't know if you're going to leave me. And so even being with you doesn't make me feel secure. And so that is, the sort of anxious attachment style. The avoidant attachment style, on the other hand, is I don't experience you as a safe caregiver. And so when I'm threatened or distressed, I don't want to be near you at all. I don't want to, I want to create as much distance from you as possible. And so, generally, those are the two you're most likely to see, right? Anxious and avoidant. Disorganized attachment, you see most infrequently, and it's most commonly seen in children who come from, and adults, obviously, therefore, who come from incredibly abusive, neglectful homes. And you see sort of chaotic, strange behavior. There doesn't seem to be a clear pattern. It's sometimes the children are frozen and totally emotionless. Sometimes there's a sort of freneticness. As the name sort of suggests, it's a series or pattern of disorganized emotional and behavioral events. And so those are generally, but what you tend to see is anxious and avoidant. And I've seen this play out in marriages too. It's fascinating in marriages when somebody who's anxiously attached and somebody who has an avoidant attachment, when they're married, because then what happens is during a fight or during a stressful period, the avoidantly attached person wants to pull back and just like get space. So if you're anxiously attached, you feel that and you think, oh my gosh, what's happening? Are you going to leave me? Are you angry? What? And so you dive in further. Hey, we need to talk. We need to talk. Hey, where are you? What do you do? This is bad. We need to communicate, which only makes the avoidantly attached person feel more anxious and threatened. So they pull back even further. And you just have this like spiraling into chaos where the avoidant person feels attacked. The anxious person feels unseen and unheard. For each of them, that signals threat. And so each goes deeper into their sort of attachment behaviors, avoiding or drawing near. And man, it can be incredibly difficult to break that cycle, but to see it is important. Yeah.
That was like the story of my engagement.
Are you still engaged? No.
Oh, I'm married now.
You're married.
So we got through it. Oh, yes.
Good, great. Good.
Yes, it was a very long and challenging engagement that brought a lot of learning, and because of it, we've had a very beautiful, fruitful marriage. I think because we just had to like kind of get through all of that.
Yes.
But yeah, it was something that I wasn't aware of until I was sort of in the moment. Like you were saying, like your attachment style really comes out in moments of where you feel threatened.
Yes.
And so because I hadn't had like an extreme relational turmoil before in my life, when that was happening in engagement, it was terrifying and horrifying. And suddenly I was like reacting in ways where I was shocked or like, I don't know why I'm feeling this way, or I don't know why I'm responding in this way. And so I think that's another reason why it's so important for people to understand and delve into what their attachment style is, because in those moments of threat, when you don't feel secure, it's hard to then be like, let me take a step back and figure out why I'm acting this way.
No, exactly. It's very right. We tend to just react. Like I need secure. I want safety. I want security. And so anxiously attached people seek security by drawing near, avoidantly. So we're after the same thing, interestingly, but in different ways. Yeah. I'm really glad you, I think I've seen a lot of couples not understand that dynamic. And as a result, continue to like vilify the other person. You just don't give me space. Well, you never meet my needs. And it rather than appreciating, hey, we're both seeking security here. We both actually want the same thing for ourselves and for one another, really. But it is really hard in the heat of that to get to that place. And so understanding it in quieter moments can be really helpful. Yeah.
Yeah, I would definitely encourage people to do that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Yeah, understanding my own attachment style has helped a lot in my own relationship. Not married, just have a boyfriend. But
Okay.
it's interesting dating someone that he's securely attached, and I can tell, I just like notice that the way that he interacted with me, and I'm not. I'm anxiously attached. So it's interesting being in a relationship with someone you can look at and be like,
Yeah.
that's how you actually like properly respond to conflict, and being able
Yes.
to kind of like work through
Yes.
that. But he knows like what my attachment style is, so he can better understand, so it's easier to work through
Yeah.
conflicts and such. But I'm
Yeah.
just happy that before I got into a serious relationship, like later in life, that I've more fully understood that, because yeah, can't even imagine how that would have played out like
I
as a
know.
younger adult.
Yeah, that insight can be so important, because even if
Yeah.
you're in the moment and you're sort of feeling those feelings,
Hmm.
to be able to say, look, I have some sense of where this is coming from. I do have some sense that this is um, these are very real feelings, but I'm actually safe in this relationship. And so
Yeah.
self sort of an object intellectual cognitive check and say, this is how I'm feeling, but I know that he's there. The conflict is okay. It doesn't mean he's leaving. Just having had that insight and that knowledge can be really helpful to not act maybe impulsively or rashly.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's
So we
great.
talked a little about how, our attachment style really comes out in times where we feel threatened or unsafe.
Yeah.
Could you maybe just go into like areas of our life or like relationships or yeah, just different spots where we might see our attachment style really affecting our life?
Yeah. So I think the primary areas where you're going to see it are in relationships. Um, it's gonna play a pretty significant role in the degree to which um, and how you handle stress,
Mhm.
fear, big moments of transition. During those moments, do you
Mm-hmm.
seek the comfort and safety and security of other? So, by the way, so the way they sort of talk about attachment is that your attachment to a caregiver gives you an internal working model. You'll hear this phrase used, internal working model, IWM. And an internal working model it's like a template. It's like a cognitive template for how relationships work. And so most of us have a general template for how we think relationships work. And that includes everything from, is it safe to express certain feelings? How is conflict dealt with? Um, is this person safe, trustworthy? Can they hold me? Can they hold me? By that, I mean, can they create like an emotional space that can handle all of my thoughts and feelings, and can I know that I'm seen and known and loved? So this is our internal working model. And so um, those internal working models are at play throughout the day. They're at play throughout major life transitions. They're at play through. And so when stressful moments happen, what does my internal working model say about how I should handle this? Um, does mom or dad want to hear this? Do my friends want to hear it? No, they can't. No, I'll just be a burden. They don't want to hear it. And so where do you tend to see this? I think you tend to see it most in relationships. I mean, that is one huge area. The other area that I think it comes out in is, um, and by relationships here, I mean everything from friendships, right, to romantic relationships. And then even ultimately, there's some research on God attachment,
Mm.
that how we
Yeah.
approach God tends, on average, to correlate with or correspond to, is the language they use in the literature, tends to correspond to how we attach to our parents. And so if you have, and by the way, this can be tricky, right? Because if you have an anxious attachment to God, um, because you're so afraid of God leaving you or abandoning you, you might be in church all the time. So I go to daily mass. I'm constantly clicking the rosary beads. I'm praying novena after novena after novena. And people from the outside might be like, man, look at that. Look at her faith. What a holy woman of God. She is just so real Proverbs woman, right? And you're like, well, no, I'm actually terrified that if I don't do these things, God will be disappointed in me and will leave me. And so So what's interesting about that is you can't just always look at the external behaviors.
Mm.
External behaviors alone don't signify the quality
Mm.
of the relationship. Um, I know young couples that are like glued to each other,
Mm.
right? They're just like always touching. You've seen these folks, right? They're just always touching each other, and they're at mass and they're like draped over one another, right? And if you scratch the surface, like their relationship is like incredibly, um, toxic and fraught with conflict. And then I've seen elderly couples who um, can walk in a room and just look at each other and do what they need to do.
Mm.
And there's such a deep and abiding trust and
Mm.
safety and security. And so my point is that the behavior itself doesn't always signify, it can, but it doesn't always signify the quality of the relationship. And so
Mm.
sometimes securely attached individuals are perfectly comfortable walking to a room, giving somebody a kiss on the forehead, and then one person sits and reads a book and the other watches a TV show. Um, that can be secure attachment. It could also be avoidant attachment, right? Like the quality of the bond. And so all that to say, I tend to think we see attachment in the quality of somebody's relational bonds and who they turn to, and how they turn to them in times of threat or distress.
I was just going to say that's really interesting. And I kind of had a follow-up
Yeah,
question
please.
that you talked about how it's usually in our childhood
Mm-hmm.
what affects like what forms our
Mm-hmm.
attachment style. But is there the potential to say be raised securely and then something happens later in life that
Yeah.
alters your attachment style?
Yeah.
Although I do think normally it's like what you're raised with is the attachment style that you have, but I have heard of things happening later in life that can alter your attachment style.
Absolutely. No, for sure. So, it goes both ways, right? So I've seen it the case that somebody starts off with a secure attachment. And then for one reason or the other, maybe the parents get divorced, and all of a sudden, whichever parent they go with, mom is no longer able, because she's going through so much emotional pain and turmoil and uncertainty. Mom is no longer able to be that safe, secure base. And mom's anxious herself and overwhelmed by grief. And so all of a sudden now, that child's attachment goes from secure to maybe anxious. And dad is dad's grieving in his own way, and dad's dating all these other women, and dad's, drinking a little more than he should and gets a little bit loud and scary. And so now you've got, right, so a child who had a secure attachment can have, and that attachment can switch over time. And so, but the flip side is true too. Having an anxious or avoidant attachment, if you come into a relationship with somebody who is securely attached and who can convey that to you, there's you guys, I think you guys would actually love this guy. There's a psychiatrist, wrote around the time of like World War II, named Conrad Baars. He's a Catholic psychiatrist. And Baars wrote a book called Feeling and Healing Your Emotions. And he wrote a book called Healing the Unaffirmed. And he wrote another book called Born Only Once. And he uses the language of affirmation, not in the way that maybe the modern mind thinks of it, but affirmation for him is when a parent is fundamentally able to communicate the child's goodness to them. Even in times of like discipline, even when the child is dysregulated and falling apart, or when the child's but this is at the level of like, it's like security in the sense that this is like, you feel it in your bones. Like, I'm good. And, I say all of that because if you have that in your life, if you have somebody who can convey that to you, who can make you feel that, it can go a long way in healing an insecure attachment. What you start to learn is people are safe and can be trusted. And it's okay for me to have big feelings and big emotions, and they can be held and they can be acknowledged, and I don't have to squash them or push them down, or this person can handle that. And so over time, that internal working model of yours, if you're with somebody who has a secure attachment, or who can give you that affirmation of like, you're feeling and experiencing your fundamental goodness, that can change, and it does. Yeah. So it goes both ways. So people who had secure attachments can have insecure attachments.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And think about all the sorts of traumatic events that can happen with people and between people that can cause our internal working models to sort of be shattered.
Yeah.
But they can also be rebuilt. And the problem is this takes time, and it takes some deliberateness, and yeah, and also sort of most commonly, if we're insecurely attached, we don't always feel comfortable being with somebody who's securely attached. I mean, because they're securely attached. So we look at them and we're like, why aren't you reacting? Like, what's wrong with you? And so sometimes we're actually initially more drawn to people whose attachment style fits ours, like hand in glove, right? So actually, in some ways, if you're anxiously attached, having someone who's avoidant, they're sort of like this, like, they can be this sort of distant, removed, like nothing seems to bother them. They're not. And so that can actually help calm you maybe initially. But over time, the very thing that attracts us to somebody can sometimes be the very undoing of the relationship.
It's interesting that you bring up, like, that you can start with maybe more of a secure attachment, but then later in life, like different events can change that. Because even just looking back at my childhood and going through therapy, my parents like desperately loved me and tried their best. But there were some pretty chronic health problems with like one of my siblings and then one of my parents. And so because of that, they weren't always like available just
That's
because they're
exactly
human.
what I mean. Yeah,
They
exactly.
can't, be everything. But because of that, I didn't always know, like, okay, am I going to be important in this situation,
That's
quote
it.
unquote,
That's
or
it.
is it the focus going to be on the people who are sick?
I know.
And it was so foundational for me to kind of discover that looking back, because it
Yes.
was one, I was able to have a lot more compassion on myself and be like, I understand kind of where some of these thoughts and feelings are coming from and why
Yeah.
I'm responding, reacting. And then also to have compassion and empathy on my parents.
For
Like,
sure.
wow, they were going through a lot as well. And I can understand the intentions that they had and what they were trying. And now entering like motherhood myself, I have a 6-month-old baby.
You have a 6-month-old? Congrats.
Thank you.
That's awesome.
But it's just so like it brings up a lot of those thoughts in me,
I know.
because as a baby, they're just so needy, and so it's very like tangible. Like she cries, I
Yeah.
pick her up and hold her, she is
Yeah.
comforted, and it's like, whoa, this is
I know,
crazy, and it's
dude.
this huge responsibility.
I know. It's also so there's a woman, she's worth looking up. Her name is Karen Purvis. Purvis. And she developed this program for children. She calls them children from hard places. But think about the kids who are like the most abused and neglected children. Oftentimes end up in the foster care system or taken away from their parent, but like working with some of the worst, the most abused and neglected children. And she has this beautiful line. And so she developed this program. It's called TBRI, Trust-Based Relational Interventions. And she makes the whole point that, look, the first year of life is all about the child crying and learning that when I cry, mom and dad are there for me, that my voice matters. And she said, when you come from really hard places, and what's interesting about that is you brought up a great point, which is like, not from a really hard place. Our parents who love us tremendously, and for the most part, for most people, right? We know our parents sort of objectively love us, but they have all sorts of things going on, and sometimes for one reason or the other, aren't able to signal that thing that we need signaled to us. And Purvis notes that that first year of life is about, when I cry, do you listen? Are you there? Does my voice matter? And what she basically thinks, like working with these worst of the worst kids, is you have to essentially in your relationship with them go back and give them that thing that they never got. And that all of their behavioral and emotional problems can essentially be traced back to they didn't have a secure, trusting relationship early on. They never learned that when I cry, like mom and dad are there. And so she says, and it's really moving. Every time I think about it, I sort of feel myself welling up, that she says that you try to communicate that when that child uses their words, when they communicate to you, if you use your words, if you tell me what you need, I will move heaven and earth to make that happen. I will do whatever is within my power to meet your needs. If you give me words. And so she's working with kids who who cut and stab and punch and shoot. And she says, just give me your words and I will do whatever you need. And she builds trust with them. When they speak, she listens. And so for her, a big thing is like when a child is speaking, look at them. Like it's so simple. And I mess this up all the time, right? We have a lot of kids. There's a lot of life going on. And I'm trying to cook dinner. But like when my daughter speaks, do I give her my eyes? And so Purvis is always going on about like, give them your eyes, give them your words, and give them touch. And it doesn't have to be big and long. And like when my daughter's talking, do I just put my hand lovingly on her shoulder and give her my eyes for 2 minutes? And then I can say, hey, babe, look, I got to cook. Okay. Daddy's got to finish cooking. I want to hear your story, but I got to finish cooking. All right. And then I can go up and do it. But what I do most of the time is I cook and she's talking and I'm like, yeah. Oh my gosh. Great. Right. And I'm not looking, she's not getting my full attention. And that's shaping something, like, look, doesn't that make me the worst dad in the world? No, but I'm laying down a template for her. And anyway, I think all this stuff, TBRI, Conrad Baars affirmation, it's all like essentially the same thing.
Yeah. Like you
Jackie,
said,
what do you got? I see thoughts
yeah.
percolating in your head, Jack.
Yeah. Oh, so many thoughts. But yeah, it's interesting that you say it is so simple, but it also as a parent can be so complicated. Like it's hard to be perfect in doing so.
Yeah.
But I remember also a good way to raise children that have a secure attachment is to become securely attached yourself.
Yeah.
Because I remember I was learning about this in psychology class and so on. And oftentimes there was a correlation between what the parents or the main caregiver's attachment style was versus what their child was raised as. So a lot of parents, I think especially in our parents' generation, are not aware of these things. And I don't know, I feel like therapy was not as much of a thing that you would know your attachment style and try to heal and all of that. Sure. So parents can be not even aware of the ways in which they're passing down this anxious or...
I think that's very true. Yeah. And there's all sorts of images for this sort of thing you can find some neat sort of images, but it's like in some ways we can't give what we don't have. And so the holes in us, we sort of pass those holes on to our kids very often. Conrad Baars says something like, the unaffirmed person can't give affirmation. What they give is like pseudo affirmation. Yeah. Because it's not real. It doesn't come from a genuine place of like communicating that you sense the other person's goodness. And so I think it's so important to do this work, precisely because I still find that sometimes I act and react in ways toward my children that are totally rooted in like fear and anxiety, maybe not feeling safe and secure myself. And as a result of not feeling safe and secure myself, I try to manipulate and control my environment. So that's like one of my character defects is like when I feel unsafe or insecure, I'm going to try to manipulate and control my environment and the people in it. And I'll do all sorts of things to do that. Sometimes it's getting really intellectual. Sometimes it's, puffing up and trying to be the big guy. Sometimes, right, there's all sorts of ways I do this. But what I end up signaling to my children or to my spouse is like, I can't be trusted with certain feelings. I can't be trusted with certain experiences. Dad isn't safe when it comes to my faults or failings. Dad isn't safe when And that's me. That's my insecurity. That's my not feeling like I have a place to. And so I think it's so true. We so often parent out of our framework for how relationships work. Um, like what emotions are okay for your kids. This is one that for me, I realized anger, and there's all sorts of reasons why this is the case. But for me, anger, when my um, kids would get angry and like stomp away, which is like sometimes what 3-year-olds do and 4-year-olds do, and sometimes 15-year-olds do it. I felt like a flash of anger. This like, don't ever stomp away from me. Like, what is that? Like, where does that come from? Some part of it is fear. I've been able to like untangle some fear in there. And I find myself actually afraid of anger. I think all the other emotions are like pretty good and acceptable, but I worry that anger makes people irrational, and irrational people hurt people. And that's whatever. I have all sorts of reasons for that belief. But it actually harmed the way I was parenting, because the truth is, sometimes there's times when I think I need to actually let my 4-year-old stomp away. Because to turn her around and say, don't you ever do that. You get back here now. And it's not actually communicating the thing I want to communicate. I want to address a different behavior, and I can get caught up in, right. And so there's times when I might let it go completely. And some people who listen to that won't like that, and that's fine. But then there's times when I need to wait to address it. Hey, babe, look, I know you feel really frustrated. And sometimes I address it in the moment like that. Hey, look, love, I know you're feeling really frustrated, but I need you to kind of turn and look at daddy, okay? Let's not stomp like that. What is her stomp? So there's Karen Purvis again. What is her stomping telling me? Usually what happens when my daughter stomps away, or when my 15-year-old stomps away, is they have a feeling or experience that they don't know how to put into words. And that's all they can do to communicate it. If I take a second to sort of get past my own like impulsive reaction and say, what is he telling me right now? He feels scared. He feels overwhelmed. What does he feel that's causing him to stomp? Sometimes it's, Dad, you're not listening. Like sometimes it's on me. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, I've actually created the conditions for my child to stomp away, and then I punish them for it. So yeah, look, learning to, and by the way, this is overwhelming. And I don't think you have to have it perfectly there by the time you get married. Like we also have to recognize it in this picture for people of faith. Like every morning we're tapping back into God's grace every morning. And we're saying like, God, where are you? Help me. I tend to feel anxious. I tend to feel insecure. Help me not to be impulsive or reactive. Help me to be calm, peaceful, patient. Help me to be able to cultivate trust and security for others and with you. And we need to pay attention to these things, because we can parent from this place. Be aware of it, begin to work on it, but don't be overwhelmed by it.
Yeah. I mean, I think while we're on this earth, even if you reach secure attachment, we're never going to be perfect or like
Never.
perfectly securely attached.
Never.
So there's going to be ways in which, I mean, we're constantly healing. We're constantly being sanctified and growing. So yeah, there's no way that you're going to be perfect. There's kind of like a stereotype, or not a stereotype, but I think a misconception that, oh, I need to be perfectly healed before I can enter into a relationship, or I can, but that's just not, there might
good
be some
luck.
huge,
Realistic.
yeah.
Good luck.
We're not going to get there on this earth.
No. And like, and then the question is like, look, there may be some red flag issues, right? Like,
yeah, exactly.
I don't know. You might say something like, look, if somebody has a pervasive and chronic pornography problem, like that should probably be addressed before you get married. If somebody has like rage issues, if somebody is like a chronic liar, and like there's certain things that are like these red flags that you'd say. But for some of these things, to be honest, for some of these things, marriage and fatherhood is the place where they can begin to be healed. Like the truth is, I don't know, for me, being a dad awakened so many things in me that, one, like wounds and hurts that I didn't even know that I needed to work on, but were there. but two, also like this fierce love and and in that like fierce love, a deeper motivation to work on some of these things, um, a willingness to look at parts of myself I'd been unwilling to look at before, um, and also like we very rarely heal in isolation. And so for me, like a part of healing is oftentimes happens in relationship to my wife, meaning like I tend to be like sarcastic and dismissive. And so I could try to sit in a room and just like heal from that. But actually, the way it tends to heal in my life is like I act or react in a way that hurts my wife, and I see I hurt her and I don't want to. And so like I try to humbly go back and admit where I was wrong and listen to her say like, yeah, babe, like you always do that, or you always do that. And then I can hear myself articulate, I'm sorry I did that. I did it because I was feeling scared and overwhelmed. And next time I'm feeling scared and overwhelmed, I'll like try to do this thing instead. That's a healing right there. Like to have that insight and that increased willingness to see how and why I'm reacting a certain way and to respond differently. At least in my book, I define healing as the freedom to love the way God calls you to love. It's not freedom from pain. It's not freedom from suffering. It's not freedom from certain thoughts. It's freedom to act the way that you want to act, not be reactive, it's freedom to try to love. And it doesn't mean I don't get afraid or scared in relationships. Still, I do, but I see it, I notice it, and I say, I don't want to react the way that my mind is telling me to, or my attachment pattern is telling me to. I actually want to respond like humbly and gently with sincerity rather than sarcasm. And so I'm going to do it. And that's a healing. I really think that is healing, but it oftentimes happens actually in relationship. And so you're going to find you heal if you're open to it. You heal in relationship to your spouse and in relationship to your children.
I love that too, because attachment in and of itself has to do with relational
Yes.
connection. And
Yes.
so, of course, it would
Yes.
heal in
Yes.
as we are sanctified in relational connection to each other. So I
Exactly.
think that's so important, and I think it's almost more important that someone would have the motivation or the desire, like I want to continually grow in my life, or I want to continually heal and be better. That is more of a green flag than someone who's like perfect and has it all together,
I
because
agree.
something under the surface is probably being hidden then.
I agree. For me, the word for all relationships, I think if I had to pick one criteria that defined like what is the thing you want to see in a relationship to know that it's good, it's willingness. Like I'm willing to look at whatever my wife asks me to look at. I'm willing to go to whatever length I need to address problems that are like, the word is willingness. And if a person has willingness, you're like, then they'll do what needs to be done, whether that's like the homework of the soul or getting psychological help, or whether that's like willingness signals the potential for continued growth. And right. Yeah. If somebody says, yeah, I'm not willing to look at that part of myself, I'm not willing to, that's when I tend to think like red flag. I don't know.
Yeah. So I like how you mentioned that it's often in relationships that we can heal and develop a secure attachment. Are there other like concrete ways for anyone listening? I think first, kind of take a step back. The best way to identify your attachment style, if you have no idea, and this is the first time that you're hearing about attachment styles, and then if you do have an insecure attachment style, what are ways, like steps that you can take to develop a more secure style?
Yeah. And there's a book out called Attached that kind of gives an introduction to some of this stuff. One real practical way is to, once you begin to recognize these dynamics at play, try to put yourself in proximity to securely attached people. That is the environment in which, and it doesn't have to be, like if you're married, it doesn't have to be your spouse. It could be a good friend. It could be a priest or pastor. It could be a confessor. It could be a spiritual director, but begin to get, surround yourself by people who have secure attachments. The second is, I think we can actually do sort of imaginal exercises that can begin to shape our attachment templates. And what I mean by that is to sit quietly and imagine somebody who you think would be safe. Like, who is that person? Maybe it wasn't someone in your life even. Maybe it was somebody who you saw interacting in like a friend's life. Like my buddy Tom's grandfather. I mean, that guy just seems so safe and safe no matter what was happening. And you imagine yourself with that person, and you start to imagine, how would they be acting with me right now? Like, would they have their hand on my shoulder? Would they have their arm around me? Would they be holding both of my hands? And to allow yourself to be steeped in this image of security, like emotional and relational security. And then you say, like, what would they be saying to me right now? How would their voice sound? How would I think there is some exercises like that. If we begin to use images of secure and safe people, we can gently begin to punctuate and poke little holes in maybe our own insecure attachments, like open ourselves up to the possibility that it might be okay to trust somebody, that I might be good enough, my voice might be worth hearing, and if we begin to recognize that that's a possibility, we might take risks with people. I might try at work to just share with a colleague that I'm having a bad day. And when that colleague reacts in a way that I didn't expect, I'm really sorry to hear that. Hey, if you ever need anything, let me know. When I totally thought that they would shut me down or be bored or ignore me, I've taken that risk. They've affirmed it. Now, all of a sudden, I'm more likely to take that risk again in the future. That behavior is more likely to be affirmed, and my template will begin to change. But like, there's two ways. I think one, we can start with these sort of, and it could be a prayer. It can be in the context almost of prayer. Maybe there's a saint who you particularly relate to, who feel safe. But allow yourself to like be seen by them, to be known by them, and how do they react? How do they touch you? What's the tone of their voice? What's their, and then surround yourself by secure people, recognize where maybe you're acting out of insecurity and fake that till you make it, fake it till you make it. Act securely. When you want to text your significant other for the 45th time and be like, oh my God, where are you? Just be like, okay, if I was securely attached, what would I be thinking and feeling right? Okay, I know I feel anxious right now, but if I was securely attached, I would trust that this person was there. I would trust that they were going to come back. I would trust that. And I would trust that even if they didn't, I'll still be okay. Okay. How would I react? Well, I wouldn't send them a 46 text message. Okay. And so you just like, you can fake it till you make it. Especially the key with that, fake it till you make it, is when you're interacting with other securely attached people. If you act like you have a secure attachment with somebody who has an insecure attachment, they might not actually affirm what your behavior. And so anyway, all that to say, they might prove themselves to be untrustworthy. You're unable to be what you need, and that could be harmful. But I would recommend those three things maybe.
Good advice. I know you mentioned earlier about how our attachment style can come into effect when it comes to our relationship with God, which makes total sense because
Yep.
the Lord relates to us as father, as a parent.
Yes.
And so, of course, the way our parents in that relationship formed would definitely reflect in our relationship with God. And I know for me, that was something that was really helpful to understand too, is like, these are even why I'm having some of the struggles and doubts in my faith, because I'm choosing to kind of project this onto God. So could you talk a little bit more about that and how someone who maybe, if they're recognizing that in their faith walk, what are some ways to heal that?
Yeah. So in some ways it maps on very similarly to what I was saying with like with people. I think actually, it's funny. I developed a program. I don't even know do I have it here? I developed this, now maybe it's on the shelf, a 12-week program called Known embraced by the heart of the Father. And it's basically a 12-week program that we walk people through exercises to help deepen their attachment to God. And it starts with actually acknowledging in all the ways that we feel like it starts with truth. How do I actually feel about you? Like, here's how I actually, not how I think people tell me I should feel, but here's how I actually feel about you. And here's what I think you actually think and feel about me, God. And then we move into how I want to actually feel, but here's how I want to feel. And then we talk about the experiences that have shaped how I feel, like why I feel about you the way I feel about you. But look, I mean, so many times, like we know up here that God is love, God is mercy, God is every praise and worship. So like, yeah, he's a good, good father. Like, yeah. But like here, like right here, it's like, you're not safe. And there's this passage in the catechism. It's fascinating. I think it's like 397, paragraph 397. It says, it's talking about Adam and Eve and the original fall. And then it goes on to say that all subsequent sin, all other sins that we engage in are a result of disobedience and a lack of trusting in the goodness of God. That's pretty fascinating. I mean, that is that our sin, the ways I sin, arise from not trusting that God is good. Like just maybe, you're going to be too busy the way my parents were too busy. Like maybe, just maybe, like you care more about what's going on in Iraq and the Ukraine than you do about like me feeling like this guy doesn't like me or something. You know, we can get into this, and that maps onto our childhood experience.
Yeah.
Our siblings had real problems. Like I feel bad that I got a C on a test, and mom and dad are worried, are working with it, like my sibling who has, cerebral palsy or like something. And so I've learned that there are real problems and then there's my problems. And I bring that into my relationship with God. I don't bring him my heart. I don't bring him what's happening because I feel like, but there's people out there with real problems. And part of what we need to do, I think, is begin with honesty and acknowledge, God, I feel like you just don't care. I feel like my problems are too small for you. I feel like you don't care. You don't go back into the experiences that have shaped that. And then I think we can invite God into that. And so I do a very similar meditation in the program. You sit with God the Father, and you might even start with an image of a loving person in your life. How would they react? How would they respond? And sort of map that onto God the Father. And then walk with God the Father back into these memories. And go back into these memories that have shaped how you think about him. Like hold his hand, visualize holding his hand, or I mean, it can even be more childlike. Like imagine maybe he's holding you or carrying you the way you carry it like a toddler. Whatever image conveys safety and security, go back into that memory and see what God wants to say. What does he want to show you? There's a great book called The Context of Holiness. I don't know if you're familiar with this. It's psychological reflections on the life of Saint Therese in her Story of a Soul. Awesome. Yeah. But she has there's a ton about attachment in there. Therese had like a super insecure attachment, super. And then like it like physically manifests. She basically like her mom gives her away to a wet nurse. She forms a bond with the wet nurse, gets ripped away from the wet nurse, put back with a very anxious mother who was anxious because she had lost so many children. Then her mom dies, which is like the ultimate attachment wound. Her sister steps in and takes the place of it, and she makes her sister promise she'll never leave me. And then her sister leaves to join the convent, and Therese gets sick. And then when the sister finally takes like final vows, Therese gets super sick, so much so that they thought she was going to die. And what ended up healing it was she seems to have this mystical experience of the Blessed Mother. She's laying in bed. They think she's going to die, and she's crying out, "Mama, Mama, Mama." And she says that she had this vision of the Blessed Mother smile at her. And she woke up. It's just like, I'm here. You're okay. You're safe. And so I think we need to give God the opportunity to take us back into these old memories and experiences and show us the truth. Like we learned all sorts of things from these experiences. And oftentimes we learn like the wrong thing accidentally.
Yeah.
People aren't safe. I'm not good. The world can't be trusted. Nobody, we invite God to take us back and to show us what he wants us to really learn. And anyway, so we walk through all this in the program, but I think those are things that people can begin to do. And we're running a group right now of about 20 people who are going through it. And we're just seeing really great fruit from it, man. It's awesome.
I'd never heard of that book. But
It's
I
great.
love Saint Therese, and
Yes.
I always related to her because I'm like someone else that had anxious attachment, and now is a saint. I relate to her a lot in her
Yeah.
her life, and
Yes. Yes.
um,
You'll love that book.
yeah,
It's a quick read. It's written by a counselor who's a Carmelite who's reading her
okay.
story of a soul and like showing some psychological insights.
That's so
And
interesting.
Therese had this image, Jackie, of when she became novice mistress, she felt like it was like too big for her. She was like, I can't
Yeah.
do it. Like I'm not up for it. So she said, I have this image of me in the arms of the Father with my head and he's holding me like a child. And this is like a 20-something-year-old woman, right?
Mm.
He's holding me like a child, and my head is nestled in his shoulder. And all of the graces that he has for the sisters, I take them and I just hand them behind me to them. She's like, I can't even look. It's too scary to even look at the task. I just keep my head nestled in his shoulder and I turn and I hand them to him. And in so many ways, I think we actually need to get back to a sort of deep and childlike abiding trust. My daughter, dude, I'll walk by her in the kitchen and she'll be like, Dad, catch, boom. And she jumps. I'm like, oh my, and like, luckily to this day, I haven't dropped her, right? The trust. She will ask me for chocolate chips in the morning. Almost every morning, she says, Dad, can I have chocolate chips? I'm like, no, babe, you can't. For like 6 months. But she's confident enough every morning to ask. And man, like, what if we could do this? What if we could get back to a sort of a childlike, this is what Christ says. And that's sort of damning. I think so often we think we're actually supposed to become like almost less reliant on God as we become more mature. And it's like the total opposite, to be childlike. Like, how does my daughter look at me? How and if I don't have that image, maybe I haven't had that experience in my own life. You might look at one you see. Look at a relationship that you see. Like, how did that little girl look at her daddy? Well, that's how God wants me to look at him. And man, that is like, and it's important for men to get back to that too, like to be childlike with the Father. No, like I'm a big, strong man. I'm a protector. I'm a provider. Yeah, fine, all that. But he wants your childlike heart. He wants that part of you that like gets scared at night, and that part of you that feels like you can't do it. That part of you that says, I have to put on a brave face. Like he wants to hear those parts of you. The way I want to hear that with my daughter and my son.
That's beautiful. I found that a lot of, similar to what you were saying about Saint Therese, is I found a lot of healing as I've growing to become more and more secure from an anxious attachment was through just finding a rightly ordered attachment with God and healing my relationship in the ways that I view God, and just growing in my faith. And also have had experiences with the Blessed Mother that have just helped me to be more grounded. If your identity is grounded in God and you can feel like you're securely attached to him, and that no matter how you sin or what you've done wrong, that his mercy is always there, and he's not going to leave you, and that he's there with you. Where humans may fail, like that God will never fail you. So that's beautiful. So it's not just like going to therapy or some of the other things that you've mentioned. I think that's a really important part of it, because that
Absolutely.
helps you to like sort through a lot of it with a professional that can help you work through different traumatic memories or things that help to form your attachment. So I think it's both, but I think also addressing the spiritual element of it is really important in healing your attachment style.
I do too.
And I think I like that you mentioned, I forget what the name of the psychologist was that you mentioned, but
Conrad Baars.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. There was another one where she talked about like the way to help a child have secure attachment is to know their goodness at their core.
Yeah. So
That's whose that
Karen
was?
Purvis was the
That's it.
trust-based
Okay.
relational intervention. Yeah.
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 But when you said that, it just reminded me that that's just what God like desperately wants us to know is just
Yeah.
how good we are at
Yeah.
our core, and that finding that goodness, because no matter what we've done wrong, our faults
I
or
know.
failings, like knowing that in God we are still good always,
I know.
um, helps us be securely attached and begin to heal.
And that's where we grow too. Like the
Yeah.
funny thing is sometimes we think something like, I got to get better before I'm lovable. Or we think
Yeah.
I need to sort of like beat myself up in order to spur growth. If I'm really, really hard on myself,
Mm.
then I'll grow.
Yeah.
And a lot of times it's actually the opposite,
Mm.
that when we allow ourselves to like appreciate the fact that you're just loved,
Mm.
like, period, then we have the risk, then we're willing to take the risk, and we're willing to um, like push out into the deep in order to do the hard things that growing requires. But it's really hard to step out and grow when I'm trying to grow from a place of beating myself up. Like for me, growth almost always in my life, when it's been real and meaningful, has always come from somebody communicating like, I see good in you, man. And I know you're a total screw up in like virtually every area of your life right now, but man, I love you.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden I'm like, it like makes me want to live into that love. And it doesn't feel conditional. Like I felt the conditional love where it's like, we'll really love you when you're not like this anymore. But when you get that sort of unconditional love, it feels like I feel emboldened to try to grow. And that is that place. And that we get that from God. And I will say having kids has been really helpful for me. And like my mom said that would be the case. And I always thought, she would always say, someday you'll know. When you're a dad, you'll know. I'm like, all right. And the truth is, I look at my kids and I'm telling you, man, like sometimes it feels like my heart is going to explode how much I love them. Like, and I mean to the point where it's like, my children could murder somebody. Please God, they don't, right? But like they will always be my baby. Like nothing's going to change that. Nothing. And I might feel disappointed. I might feel, but like nothing is going to change that. And when you start to think about that, like my child could murder somebody and I'm still her dad, or I'm still his dad and I love him. You start to realize that like when God sees our sins, like I get it. I say I get it. I get a glimpse of it, man. I get a glimpse of it. And now I can see how he might love me even when I'm like a total screw up, or when I struggle with habitual sins, or when I look at my daughter or son when they're ashamed or embarrassed and I'm like, I don't care. Like I freaking love you. I want to help you. Like I want to help you get better. I want to help you grow. I want to help you. Anyway, that's like when I'm parenting. Yeah. When I'm on the ball, sometimes I obviously, my fears, my insecurities get in there. We've talked about that, but most of the times I get a glimpse of that. And, man, if we could remember that that's how God feels about us, we'd live very different lives.
Yeah. We might trust him more.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Have you ever read The Life of the Beloved by Henry Nouwen?
No, but I'd love to. I like him.
It's very just, I'd say not even just theological, but I think he was a psychologist or studied psychology, but he was also a priest. But
Yeah.
that book was a big step in me starting to grow more into secure attachment. It just talks about your belovedness in God and how we often can forget that and become so define ourselves by what other people say or by if we're rejected, so on and so forth. But for anyone listening, I definitely recommend any of his books, but that one to start with.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for coming on and
Thanks
for
for
talking
having
about
me,
this.
y'all.
Yeah.
This is great. I'd love to do it again sometime.
Yeah.
Minus the technical difficulties.
We would love to have you on again. I feel like there's so much we could talk about. But I also just wanted to give a plug for your book that just came
Yeah,
out
please,
because
please.
we talked a lot about healing. But
Yeah,
your book,
Mhm.
Finding Freedom in Christ, Healing Life's Hurts,
yeah,
that was when I first had heard was a talk that you gave on healing that really impacted me. But if you
Mhm.
could share a little bit about your book and just what
yeah,
inspired you to write it.
yeah. So it came out of a talk I gave to college students, and the truth is, I wanted to find a way to bring together some of this wisdom around healing from various places to, um, but make it palatable to a Catholic audience. I think so many Catholics are suffering and struggling, and I wanted to bring hope and healing to them. And so I tried to sort of take some of these things from psychology, from the 12 steps of AA, so all the places where I think there's like wisdom in healing, and bring them into contact with theology. And so it's really intended to be a very practical book, though. Like I outlined 6 steps that I think you can do to begin um, to begin the healing journey. And it's a short book. It's intended to be able to be read quickly and to do the work. Yeah.
I love that because I often find some of these books that are great, but they can be overwhelming because they're
Yeah.
so long or there's just
Yes. Yes. Yes.
um so I feel
Yes.
like that would be something that you could fit into your life that would be like deeply impactful, but just practical too, to be able to
100%.
use as a tool.
100%. And then this known program, I mean, if we have some information about it on the Wellspring website. It's wellspringccc.com. But um, yeah, to have somebody walk with you or to walk through with a group this God attachment program, um, man, I've been like, I thought it would work, like I developed it and I think it's good. And I think but man, to hear people go through it and to see the emails we're getting, man, it's just really awesome. And so it can be another thing people could check out if they're interested.
Oh,
Yeah, we'll
definitely.
link that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. We'll link both of those below and your website and just all of your resources where you can
That's
find
awesome.
more. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Guys, this has
Well,
been great.
thank you. Yeah, thank you for coming on. I'm so happy we got the
Yes.
technology fixed and
Yes.
because I feel
Agreed.
like this is something our listeners I think are really gonna enjoy and be blessed by.
Mhm.
So I know I was. I thought I
Thank you.
think I learned a lot about attachment style,
Yeah.
even as someone that has studied a lot and worked on
Good.
my own.
Good.
So
I'm
thank
happy for
you.
that. Yeah, I'm very happy for that.
Mhm.